This happened about 2 years ago. I was 26 and had just signed a lease on a house for the first time in my life. Up until then, I had always been in apartments, the kind where you can hear your neighbor's TV through the wall and someone's always stomping around above you at midnight. I was sick of it. I wanted space. I wanted quiet. And when I found this place listed online for way under market value, I jumped on it. The house was old, not falling apart or anything, but old enough that you could feel it. The floors had that uneven softness to them, the kind where certain boards give a little when you step on them. The doors stuck in the summer and the windows rattled when the wind picked up. It was 2 stories with a full basement and a pull-down attic hatch in the upstairs hallway ceiling. The landlord told me the attic was just insulation and old ductwork. He said the basement was mostly storage and the water heater. I never questioned either of those things. The neighborhood was quiet. Not suburban quiet, more like forgotten quiet. The houses on my street were spaced pretty far apart with big, overgrown yards and mature trees that blocked most of the light. My nearest neighbor was an older woman who I saw maybe 3 times the entire time I lived there. She never waved. I never waved either. That was the kind of street it was. For the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. I was working a 9 to 5 at a distribution warehouse about 40 minutes away, which meant I left the house around 7:30 in the morning and usually got back around 6. By 8 or 9, I was in bed. My routine was boring and predictable, which is exactly how I wanted it. The first thing I noticed was the cereal. I know how that sounds, but hear me out. I had bought a box of Honey Nut Cheerios on a Sunday. By Wednesday, it was noticeably lighter. I remember picking it up and thinking I must have been eating more than I realized. I shrugged it off. I wasn't exactly tracking my cereal intake, but by Friday, the box was almost empty. I stood there in the kitchen holding it, trying to remember eating that much cereal, and I just couldn't. It didn't make sense. But what was I going to do? Call the police over a box of Cheerios? I threw it out and bought another one. A few days later, I noticed my hand towel in the bathroom was damp when I got home from work. Not soaking wet, just slightly damp, like someone had used it and it hadn't fully dried. I always hung it over the bar after my morning shower, and by the time I got home in the evening, it was usually bone dry. But that day it wasn't. I touched it and stood there for a second, then just told myself that maybe I had left the window cracked and the humidity got to it. There was always an explanation if you wanted one badly enough. Then came the toilet seat. I live alone. I'm a guy. The seat stays up. That's just how it is when no one else is around to complain about it. One evening I walked into the bathroom and the seat was down. I froze for maybe 2 full seconds staring at it before my brain kicked in and started rationalizing. Maybe I put it down that morning and didn't remember. Maybe I sat down for a different reason and forgot. I went back and forth with myself for a minute before deciding I was being paranoid and moved on. But after that, I started paying closer attention to things. Not intentionally at first. It was more like my brain had flipped a switch and I couldn't turn it off. I would leave for work and take a mental picture of how things looked, the angle of a chair, the position of my laptop on the desk, whether the blinds were pulled all the way down or halfway. And when I came home, most of the time everything was exactly as I left it. But every few days, something would be slightly off. A cabinet I was sure I had closed would be open a crack. A glass I had left in the sink would be on the drying rack. The blanket on the couch would be folded differently than how I had left it. Each one of those things, on its own, was nothing. I get that. I could explain every single one of them if I tried hard enough, but it was the pattern that started to eat at me. It was the frequency, and it was the fact that every single time, the change was small enough to make me doubt myself, but consistent enough that I couldn't fully ignore it. About a month in, the sound started. The first time was on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed reading when I heard this faint creaking from above me, not outside, above me, from the attic. It was slow, rhythmic, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to the other. I put my book down and just listened. It went on for maybe 10 seconds and then stopped. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noise. Everyone knows that. I turned off the light and went to sleep. The second time was 2 nights later. Same sound, same location, same time. Slow, deliberate creaking from directly above my bedroom. This time, I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening. After about 30 seconds, it stopped again. I was annoyed more than scared at that point. I figured there might be an animal up there, a raccoon maybe, or squirrels. I made a mental note to ask the landlord about it and went back to sleep. The third time was different. It was a Friday night, around 1 in the morning. I had stayed up late watching something on my laptop. The house was completely silent, and then I heard what sounded like a footstep directly above the hallway. Not a creak, a footstep. A single, heavy, deliberate thud that I felt in my chest. I sat up instantly. My body went rigid. I stared at the hallway through my open bedroom door, and I just listened. There was nothing for a long time. Maybe 2 full minutes of dead silence, and then I heard it again. Another thud, slightly further away, like whatever was up there had taken another step. I got out of bed as quietly as I could. I walked into the hallway and looked up at the attic hatch. It was just a plain white panel set into the ceiling with a small pull cord hanging from it. It looked the same as it always did. I stood there for a long time, holding my breath, waiting for the sound again. It didn't come. The next morning, I called my landlord. I told him I had been hearing noises from the attic and asked if he could send someone to check for animals. He said he'd send a pest control guy out the following week. In the meantime, he told me not to worry about it. Over the next few days, the noises continued, but they weren't just in the attic anymore. I started hearing things from the basement too, muffled sounds like something being dragged across concrete. I would hear them faintly while I was sitting in the living room at night, and every time I walked to the basement door and listened, the sound would stop. I opened the door once and called down into the dark. Nothing, just the smell of damp stone and old wood. I want to be clear about something. I am not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. I've been in situations most people would consider dangerous, but there's a difference between confronting a visible threat and lying in bed at night, listening to the sound of something moving through your house that you cannot see. The pest control guy came on a Wednesday. I had taken a half day from work to be there when he showed up. He was a middle-aged guy with a clipboard and a flashlight. He checked the basement first. I followed him down, and he poked around the water heater, looked at the walls, checked the windows. He said there were no signs of animal entry, no droppings, no nesting material, no chew marks. He actually seemed kind of annoyed, like I had wasted his time. Then we went upstairs. He pulled the attic hatch down, and the folding ladder unfolded with a loud metallic groan. He climbed up with his flashlight and disappeared into the dark above. I could hear him moving around up there, the boards bending under his weight. After maybe 5 minutes, he came back down. He told me there was nothing up there, just insulation, ductwork, and some old boxes the previous tenant must have left behind. No animals, no entry points. He said the noises were probably thermal expansion, the wood and metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. He wrote something on his clipboard, handed me a copy, and left. I wanted to believe him. I really did. And for about 3 days, I managed to convince myself that everything was fine. The noises had even stopped, which helped. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking the position of my kitchen chairs every time I came home. And then I found the plate. It was a Saturday morning. I had slept in and was walking to the kitchen to make coffee. As I passed the living room, something caught my eye. On the coffee table, sitting right in the center, was a plate with toast crumbs on it. Beside it was a glass with a thin ring of orange juice dried at the bottom. I had not eaten toast that morning. I had not poured a glass of orange juice. I had not even gone into the kitchen yet. Those dishes had not been there when I went to bed. I stood in the living room staring at that plate for what felt like 5 minutes. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I walked slowly into the kitchen. The bread bag was sitting on the counter with the twist tie removed. The toaster was warm. The orange juice container was out of the fridge, sitting on the counter with the cap off. Someone had made breakfast in my kitchen while I was asleep in my house. I grabbed a knife from the block and searched the entire house. Every room, every closet. I checked behind the shower curtain. I checked under the beds. I opened the basement door and went down with the knife in one hand and my phone flashlight in the other. Nothing. No one. The house was empty, but I knew it hadn't been. I called the police. 2 officers came out and did a walkthrough. They checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. No signs of forced entry. I told them about the plate and the orange juice and all the small things I had noticed over the past several weeks. One of the officers was sympathetic, but clearly didn't know what to do. The other one had this look on his face like he thought I might be losing it. They told me to get a camera and to call back if anything else happened. Then they left. I drove to the store that afternoon and bought 2 basic security cameras, one for the kitchen and one for the hallway upstairs near the attic hatch. I set them both up on my phone and tested them. They worked. I could watch the feeds from anywhere. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the camera feeds every 20 minutes, but there was nothing. The next day was the same, and the day after that, 4 full days of nothing. On the 5th night, around 2:30 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone. My eyes were barely open as I tapped the notification and loaded the hallway camera. At first, I thought the motion sensor had just glitched. The hallway was dark and still. I was about to close the app when I noticed something that made my entire body go cold. The attic hatch was open, not all the way. The panel had been pushed up and slid to the side, leaving a dark rectangular gap in the ceiling. The folding ladder was still retracted, which meant whoever opened it had done it from inside the attic. I stared at my phone screen, not breathing. I zoomed in. The gap was dark, but I swore I could make out the shape of something just inside the opening, a shadow that didn't match anything else. I couldn't tell if it was a face or just insulation, but it looked like it was positioned right at the edge, right where someone would be if they were lying on their stomach and looking down into the hallway. I did not go check. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and my shoes, and I walked out the front door in my boxers. I got in my car and drove to a 24-hour gas station 3 miles away. I sat in the parking lot and called the police again. This time they sent 3 officers. I gave them the code to my front door and told them exactly what I saw on the camera. I told them about the hatch. I told them about the attic and the basement and the food and the towel and all of it. It took them about 20 minutes. When the officer called me back, his tone had changed. He told me they found evidence that someone had been living in my attic. There was a sleeping bag laid out across the rafters. There were empty water bottles. There were food wrappers, granola bars, crackers, things that had gone missing from my kitchen over the past weeks that I hadn't even registered. There was a phone charger plugged into one of the attic outlets that I didn't even know existed. And there was a small hole that had been drilled through the attic floor into the ceiling of my bedroom. The officer said it was about the width of a pencil, just big enough to see through. They did not find anyone. Whoever had been up there was gone. The officers theorized that the person had been accessing the attic from the outside. There was a section of soffit on the back of the house that had been pried loose and reattached loosely enough to be removed by hand. You would never notice it from the ground unless you were specifically looking for it. The person would climb up, enter the attic, and wait, probably until I fell asleep. The basement hadn't been lived in, but there were signs that someone had been using it. There were fresh scuff marks on the concrete near the far wall, and a small window at ground level had a latch that didn't fully engage. The officers thought the person might have originally entered through the basement before finding better access through the attic. I never went back to that house, not to sleep anyway. I went back once to get my things with 2 friends and my dad, and we were in and out in under an hour. I broke the lease and my landlord tried to charge me a fee, which I fought and eventually got waived after I sent him copies of the police report. The police never caught anyone. They told me they would increase patrols in the area, but without a suspect description or forensic evidence worth processing, there wasn't much they could do. The case just went cold. I've thought about this more times than I can count. What gets me the most isn't the sleeping bag or the food wrappers or even the hole in my ceiling. It's the plate. That plate sitting on my coffee table with toast crumbs still on it. Whoever was living above me had come down from the attic while I was asleep, walked past my bedroom, gone into my kitchen, made themselves breakfast, sat in my living room, eaten it, and then gone back up before I woke up. They did this knowing I was 10 feet away. They did this calmly enough to sit down and eat. That means they weren't afraid of me, not even a little. I've been in my new apartment for over a year now. It's on the 4th floor, no attic, no basement, no crawl space, just a locked front door and a deadbolt I check 3 times every night before bed. My sleep has mostly gone back to normal, but there are still nights when I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and just lie there in the dark, listening. I don't hear anything, but I listen anyway. I think I always will. I still don't know who that person was. I don't know if it was a man or a woman. I don't know if they had been there before I moved in or if they started coming after. I don't know how many nights they spent in my attic watching me sleep through a hole in the floor, and I don't know why they stopped hiding and started leaving evidence behind. Maybe they got comfortable. Maybe they wanted me to know. Maybe the breakfast was a message. That last thought is the one that follows me, because if it was a message, I still don't know what it was trying to say.